Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back to more Conversations in the Digital Age. This is our night at the opera, the Metropolitan Opera. About 10 years ago, the Metropolitan Opera was plagued by declining sales and a theatrical stagnation. Then it changed course in 2006 with the appointment of Peter Gelb as its general manager. Peter Gelb gave the opera a new direction, and we're delighted, Peter, to have you with us to tell us about it.
Happy to be here with you, Jim.
Now, first, congratulations on this season, which is going strong, and congratulations that you've made the opera a source of so much interest.
Well, you know, it's essential that opera be in the public interest, otherwise the public would lose interest in it. So, you know, I'm determined, and I have been from the very first day I arrived at the Met, to keep opera and the Met in somewhere within the broader boundaries of the cultural mainstream. It's never going to be pop music or have that appeal, but we have to keep trying to inject it into the public's imagination through the productions we present on the stage and the way we connect with the larger public outside of the Opera House as well.
Well, let's talk about that. Your chairman, Ann Ziff, says you've given the opera a new vision. And your friend Andre Bishop, who was the director of Lincoln Center Theater, an opera goer since 1958, says you've saved the Met from brontosaurism. Now, can you define this new vision for us?
Well, when I first came to the Met in 2006, first of all, I had been in a transition period for 1 year while my predecessor, Joe Volpe, was showing me the ropes. I was determining what that vision would be. In fact, I was first approached for this job by Beverly Sills, who was at the time was the chairman of the board of the Met, and she urged me to come down and have an interview. At the time, I was the head of Sony Classical, the record label. So I somewhat reluctantly went to an interview because I knew that I was a strange choice for the Met. I had never run an opera company. Of course, I had a background as a producer, and I knew a lot of opera stars. I'd worked with them and other classical music luminaries, but I didn't really
So you'd met a few reigning divas.
I knew a few reigning divas. I had worked with Jesse Norman and Kathleen Battle and the Three Tenors and on various projects when I was at Sony and before. So all my life I've worked in classical music. I was an usher at the Met when I was a teenager, in fact. But I had never run an opera house, and I was somewhat surprised that they would want to talk to me. When I went down there and was interviewed by the search committee of the board, I was actually quite unstinting in my criticism of what I thought the Met had become. I mean, certainly I didn't criticize its great musical values, which to this day, thanks to James Levine and the superb forces of the Met Orchestra and Chorus, shaped by him and by Donald Palumbo, our wonderful chorus director, is the envy of the opera world and has been for decades. But I was critical about the Met's image of elitism and its disconnection from other cultural life in the city. And my concern, which I expressed to the search committee of the board, was that the Met was somewhat like an island that had been separated from the mainland, and that it needed to we needed to build bridges back to get it back in the public eye. And so I laid out a plan, which included reinvigorating the Met theatrically through the invitation of to top stage directors, being more assertive in terms of bringing in the top young stars, not waiting for them to mature into fully blown, developed divas and divos, but getting them on the ascent onto the stage of the Met, and a very broad initiative to use the Met's content as captured on television and radio and amplify that effort to make the Met more accessible to a broader public.
The key to your strategy, at least to me as an uneducated observer, has been the new productions, and you've brought 50 since 2006. There are 6, I think, this season out of 24 productions.
Right.
And it's been not without controversy. New productions are costly, and sort of the old guard takes issue with the interpretations. Can you tell us about new production?
Sure. I mean, I've learned that at the Met, anything I do is not without controversy. It doesn't, you know, the only thing I know for sure is that if I didn't do anything in an artistically proactive fashion, that the Met would gradually collapse of its own weight, because like any art form, opera has to be renewed in order to be relevant and to attract new audiences. So the trick, of course, at the Met has been to not alienate the older audience while at the same time trying to bring in a new audience, because, and this is the challenge of any aging institution in any field or any walk of life, in business and art. But my approach has basically been to, in an effort not to offend the old guard, and at the same time entice newcomers to the opera, has been to invite directors who have one thing in common, that they are dedicated to telling the stories of the operas as composed and by the composer and as written by the librettist. I think where opera companies have fallen into difficulties with their public has been where productions are produced that have little bearing to the original material. And this is a natural danger of opera because the operatic repertoire is somewhat limited. The major pieces you can count in, you know, on the fingers of not too many hands. I mean, there are about 40 or 50 standard pieces that get reproduced over and over again. And so some directors, in an effort to be creative, go overboard in deconstructing a story to make a mark for themselves as a creative force, when in fact that is not what opera needs. Opera needs is truly creative directors who are willing to stay within the boundaries of the story of the opera and still be original and new. For example, the production of the famous production of Anthony Minghella, who brought, one of the first things that I did at the Met was invite him to direct a new Madame Butterfly, which is simple and beautiful and different, and yet clearly tells the story of the sad geisha. And the same is true of our productions of The Barber of Seville, which has played this year, which involved a very ingenious effort by Bart Scheer to bring the audience closer to the action by building a passerelle, a walkway that extends beyond the pit and connects the stage literally with the audience. So these are the kind of efforts that modern day directors do that are very effective. Of course, not everything works. We're very excited about this new Merry Widow production that Susan Stroman is going to be directing, the Tony Award winning director of The Producers and great choreographer as well. We have already this season introduced a number of new works that I think have largely been greeted with success both by the older audience and the new audience.
Well, these new productions quite typically, it seems to me anyway, have had directors who had a history of being theatrical directors quite largely, and also most of them, Susan Stroman's an exception, but most of them have been foreign-born. Now, is there anything to be taken from this?
No, I have no quota system. It's only my only requirement is that they're good.
And
so
what about the fact that they're all theatrical directors?
I wouldn't say they're all theatrical directors. I'd say that most of the directors who I engage work in theater as well as opera. That the directors who only work in opera are less often engaged by me. But not to say that they aren't. For example, David McVicker, the Scottish director, has already directed 3 or 4 productions at the Met, including a
Cavalleria, new
coming
production.
up, Cavalleria Rusticana and Pagliacci. But he directed the wonderful Giulio Cesare last year, the Handel opera, the historic Donizetti Queen operas, Anna Bolena and Maria Stuarda. Some of our biggest successes have come from him, and he strictly directs opera. Same thing is true of Willie Decker, who's minimalist but very beautiful and dramatically effective Traviata is playing at the Met this season. But most of the directors I turn to are directors who do direct opera, but only when they're inspired by the story to really do something special.
So you had, for example, your opener, and usually your opener is a new production. This year it was The Marriage of Figaro, the Nozze di Figaro. The director was Richard Eyre, who had been the director of the National Theatre in London. As a matter of fact, let's watch this outrageous duet from the Marriage of Figaro between Susanna and Figaro, with Marlis Peterson as Susanna and Ildar Adrazikov as Figaro.
cinque, 10, 20, 36, 43.
Ora sì che io son contenta, sembra fatto in me, sembra fatto in me.
5,
Guarda un po' mio caro Figaro,
10,
guarda un po' mio caro Figaro,
20,
guarda un po',
30,
guarda che sul mio capello,
36,
guarda che sul mio capello,
43.
guarda un po' mio caro Figaro, guarda che sul mio capello, il mio capello.
Sì, mio cuore, ore più bello, sembra fatto in ver per te, sembra fatto in ver per te.
That was just amazing. But talking about Scottish directors, one of your new productions is Lady of the Lake this season. And of course, it was written by Sir Walter Scott, who was Scottish. So you brought in Paul Curran, a Scottish director. So, I mean, you can't quite escape the inference that foreign directors are value added to your production.
Well, the Met has always drawn upon the greatest talents in the world, both in terms of singers and directors. That's nothing new that I've instilled. I mean, I certainly am very proud of young American singers who we develop at the Met in our Lindemann Young Artist Program, who go on to become stars on our stage, and there are many such stories. As far as directors are concerned, I'm interested in just getting the best directors, the best designers. We have American directors like Bart Shear, Mary Zimmerman. There are many American directors, English directors, German directors. For me, it doesn't make any difference where they come from as long as they're good.
All right, let's talk about your superstar, Anna Netrebko. Now, she has been your superstar. She's sung at the Met some 134 times in the past 12 years. And she starred in Verdi's Macbeth this season. And of course, the director was a theatrical director who was Adrian Noble, who was the leader of the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Right.
Let's watch Anna Netrebko, because we have to watch Anna Netrebko. She's just so fabulous. She always blows me away. Now, New Year's Eve, you're going to have a gala, and it's the Merry Widow. You mentioned that, the choreographer Susan Stroman. You're going to have two superstars.
Choreographer and director.
And director. Right. Two superstars, in Renee Fleming, star of Broadway musicals, Kelly O'Hara as Valenciennes. The music is so uplifting by Franz Lehrer. Let's watch Kelly O'Hara and company in a room rehearsal, a preview of New Year's Eve.
The ladies of the chorus and the gentlemen adore us. Trying hard to comprehend, wonder where her underwear begins and where her stockings end. tippy-tip and a tippy-tap, wriggling and giggling, and then they've caught you in the trap. Afterwards there's wine and laughter, soldiers making eyes at me. It's no secret what they're after. Take me dancing, then we'll see.
That was just uplifting. But Peter, let's talk about another one of the new productions which excited great controversy, which of course is the death of Klinghoffer.
Before I talk about the death of Klinghoffer, I should mention that what makes The Merry Widow so interesting, I think, for me as a producer, is that it is a real merger of Broadway and opera. I mean, operettas in general sort of fall between the two art forms, and in a way, the operetta is kind of the precursor of the Broadway musical. But to have Broadway forces like Kelly O'Hara and the Grisettes, who we just saw, who are the showgirls who sing and dance in Maxime's, those are all Broadway chorus girls who Susan Stroman auditioned and hired for this show. And to have William Ivy Long, who's won 6 Tony Awards designing the costumes, is a real, so we have a real true Broadway invasion at the Met, which I'm very delighted about.
Well, let's move from one kind of widow to another kind of widow with the death of Klinghoffer, a sad story, a tragic story, and it created tremendous animosity really from the Jewish community in New York, many of whom are your funders. What's your take on, why did you do it, and you had the courage to resist the protests, and then you showed it at the opera, but you withdrew it from high definition?
Well, you know, now that the dust has settled, I mean, the opera has played and its run is completed. Looking back upon the experience, certainly I think I speak not only for myself, but for the entire company and for the board of the Met and for the donors who loyally stood by the Met, that we were all very glad that we did go forward with the presentation. Of course, I had no idea it was going to be this controversial. This opera has been around for over 20 years. It has created some controversy in its earlier presentations, but in recent years it hadn't been met with very little controversy, or none at all. It was presented at Juilliard a few years ago, and there were no protests at all. I guess the timing being what it is today, and the world being so troubled in such a state of upheaval in the Middle East, and the fact that it was at the Metropolitan Opera somehow seemed to galvanize this huge protest. But most of the protesters were people who had never seen the opera, who didn't even know it was an opera. We were besieged with emails telling us to cancel the play. So obviously their instructions were somewhat misguided. And in fact, anyone who did see the opera would realize, and did realize, I think, that the piece, although attempting to explain the motivation of the terrorists and the grief or the beef of the Palestinian people, is in no way sympathetic to the acts of terrorism, and is wholly sympathetic to the poor Klinghofers, both Mr. Klinghoffer, who was murdered, and Mrs. Klinghoffer, who has the final moving aria in the piece. Anyone who saw the opera walked away from the Met knowing that this was a sympathetic portrayal and of the Klinghofers, and I think that's ultimately what diffused the controversy. Because
well, one person who walked away from the opera was Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg of the United States Supreme Court, who said she saw nothing anti-Semitic about it.
Well, it certainly wasn't anti-Semitic, and it was not only not anti-Semitic, it was very sympathetic to the plight of the Klinghofers, and clearly is if it's a tract about anything, it's a tract against mindless hate and animosity, which the world unfortunately has far too much of.
One of the extraordinary features of your stewardship is bringing the opera, which in the past was regarded as a form of elitist, highbrow entertainment, to masses of people. And you've done it with Met HD, and you've done it with a simulcast in the plaza of Lincoln Center and Times Square. Really quite remarkable. Well, tell us what your thinking was behind that.
Well, my thinking behind it was really to open the Met up. I mean, I think that people, if opera is to have a future, and I certainly hope it does, new audiences need to be exposed to the art form. So it's not enough to bring dynamic new stagings onto the stage of the Met. It also is necessary to connect the Met to the largest number of people possible. I know that opera is not for everyone, but if we don't give people a chance to experience it in movie theaters, on the radio, in Times Square, we will never be able to bring in new audiences. So the HD transmissions, which began in just a few theaters in 2006, now are seen in over 2,000 theaters in 68 countries. We're seen live on a Saturday matinee in New York that we're transmitting live into movie theaters. It's seen from the West Coast to as far east as Jerusalem and Moscow, and as far north as inside the Arctic Circle in a little city of Tromsø in Norway, and as far south as the tip of Argentina.
Wow, now that's about $20 a ticket. How much is a ticket in the orchestra for typically?
Well, a ticket in the orchestra can be as much as $300 or $400, but also we have a program in an effort to democratize our ticket pricing and ticket sales. We have a rush ticket program where you can get online on a first-come, first-served basis orchestra seats for as little as $20. So we really try to draw as many people into the Met as well as into movie theaters with price incentives that make it worthwhile to experience opera and to we want to hook people and get them interested.
A word about economics. You faced a serious challenge this season with the possibility of a strike, and then you made a deal with the unions, which involved some cost cutting, some drastic cost cutting. Have you? And the unions were critical of new productions as being too expensive.
Right.
So what's happening there?
Of course, what makes the new production so expensive is largely
the
cost of making them. So the I think the unions, the union employees did not appreciate, of course, at first the effort on our part to reduce costs by gaining wage concessions, and that's perfectly understandable. These people are the best in the world. The orchestra, the chorus, the stagehands, all the personnel who work at the Met are at the very top of their class, and it's not that they don't deserve to be paid handsomely. They do. It just is, the economics of opera are such that we can't afford that. So we ultimately reached an agreement after some rancorous debate that would involve an equality of sharing of cuts, so that both the unionized employees have taken a reduction, the administrative staff has taken a reduction, and we've also committed to cut another $11 million out of the budget. So altogether, we have reduced our expenses by $20 million a year for the next 4 years.
Have you had to raise ticket prices as a result of the union contract? We
have tried to keep ticket prices at basically where they are. There are slight raises in certain places. Other tickets are less expensive. It's as I said earlier, there's such a wide variety of ticket pricing that it's possible to experience the Met in the Opera House or outside the Opera House in a movie theater for as little as $20.
So I have a question for you, Peter Gelb. Will your success at the Metropolitan Opera spoil Peter Gelb?
I don't think I'm capable of being spoiled. I have too much to worry about. The Metropolitan Opera, we have four different operas playing in repertory every week. We have 7 performances a week. I have a clause in my contract that says I have to be available on a 24/7 basis. I feel like a doctor on call. At any moment something could happen. Either a singer could get sick or something could go wrong backstage. We have a medical station right off the stage right where we can, with a hotline to Roosevelt Hospital in case somebody gets injured. The Met has 3,000 people working there. There are so many moving parts. I wouldn't have time to be spoiled, believe me.
Don't know how you do it, but thank you so much. This has been marvelous. I think since it's the end, we should end with the beginning. Which is the dress rehearsal, opening night, the marriage of Figaro, Mozart's immortal opera, Non so più, I don't know anymore what I am, with Isabel Leonard as Cherubino, and here is that.
Non so più cosa son, cosa faccio, per di fuoco ora sono di ghiaccio, ogni donna mangiare di parole, ogni donna mi fa palpitar, ogni donna mi fa palpitar, ogni donna Deseo
just awesome, Peter, and thank you so much for coming by.
Thanks so much,
This is
Jim.
wonderful, and thank you for coming by. Next week, tune in for more conversations in the digital age. I'm Jim Zirin. Good night and all the best.